we'll take off from the recent agreement of President Duterte and President Xi Jinping to go ahead and start a joint development between the Philippines and China in South China Sea. What do you make of this? What are the issues that we should watch out for?
Well, the issues have always been constant, right? In the sense that we've had so many analysts talk about them already. Although the idea of having joint development with China in the South China Sea has actually been something that's been bandied about for quite some time now. But if we talk about issues, there are a number of them. The first one, of course, is the fact that this will mean certain questions about the extent to which this fits within our constitution. I think it was Associate Justice Scarpio who kept on arguing that any agreement for joint development between the Philippines and a Chinese corporation, or the Chinese government for that matter, has to be something that fits within the framework of our constitution. Basically, that means that it works within the context of Philippine laws, Philippine sovereignty. So that's the first one, right? It's the question of again, issue of the extent to which this is going to fit within our constitutional frame. The second, of course, is precisely that question of sovereignty. Again, this will mean the usual formula of setting aside sovereignty in order to be able to take advantage at this point in time of what kind of economic benefits we can get from that joint development. Meaning to say, why should dispute over sovereignty get in the way of already allowing us to exploit whatever resources might be there. So that in itself isn't bad. It's not really an issue per se. But again, if you think about what has happened before, then the question, of course, is, well, what does this mean, for us, especially in the light of the third point? And the third point has to do with, of course, the arbitral decision. The fact that we've not said anything about the arbitral decision for more than a year now is something that's not to our advantage. There's always been that point that if we want to strengthen our position as far as our claims to these land features in the South China Sea is actually concerned, then we should be using, or at least talking about, the arbitral decision and the kinds of elements in it that are actually beneficial to us. So, in other words, going in this pathway will again delay the entire process, whereby we can resolve the issue of sovereignty, while at the same time not gaining for us any advantage from the results of the arbitral decision.
There's also a school of thought that says, you said earlier, we can shelve the sovereignty issue aside and then be more pragmatic. We need the resources, we need oil. But how does that stand with you, this pragmatic approach?
That was always the argument that was made by China for a long time, the idea of joint development. And in fact, to a certain extent, there's a certain rationality to it, right? If we enter into a joint development agreement with them and we start working with them, then this creates some sort of environment of trust, and a habit of cooperation between the two countries. In which case, the idea is that at some point it makes it easier for us to negotiate the question of sovereignty. So there's that aspect to the idea of shelving sovereignty, that in fact doing so might facilitate the process whereby we will get there. We'll make it easier for both countries to actually work. But I still think that even if I might think that that's not a bad idea, it's something that's worth entering into. The principal issue is still the question of, well, how do you deal with the constitutional limitations that are before us, right? In other words, can the Duterte administration find a way by which it can suddenly say, okay, the Constitution is immaterial to this whole thing, or there's a formula by which we can actually get around the constitutional limitations, no? And then actually proceed with talking about and implementing, a joint development agreement. Even if I think that it's not a bad idea to maybe look at or operationalizing a joint development program, the question is still, well, how do you deal with that legal requirement?